one of the main reasons we move away from people is because of fear, isn't it? It's fear of how we'll look. It's fear of how we'll feel. It's fear of what they'll say to us or what they'll do to us. Fear of how we'll respond. We're not sure how we'll respond in the moment, and so we're afraid. So I want you to see through the lens of the Christmas story 3 emblematic ways that we often wrestle, barriers in our inner map, that keep us away from people. Are you ready for those? Here they are, 3 of them if you're taking notes. The first one is this, is that fear moves me away from people. Fear will move me away from people. Interesting, in the story of Joseph and Mary, Joseph's pledge to be married, the text says, which was, we sometimes use the word betrothed. It's not a common word anymore. But what that meant was, it was kind of like a promise ring. You weren't really engaged, but you were promised. And so it was like you were actually already married, but without all the benefits of marriage. And so Joseph, when Mary comes to him and says, hey, I'm pregnant by the Lord, hello. He's this righteous man, the text says. He was faithful to the law, the text says. And so he quietly decides that he's not going to bring Mary to shame. And he quietly decides he's going to move away from Mary. We would call it, he quiet quits on Mary, is what he does today. But what's really going on? Is that the whole thing? Is that the whole story? What's going on? What's under the hood for him? I want you to see how Matthew writes this in Matthew chapter 1, verse 20. After Joseph had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be, what is the word? Afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. So in other words, all this outer stuff can be going on, even religious sounding stuff, but the reason it's happening is because of fear. And Joseph was afraid, and so he moves away from Mary. Moves me away from people. Fear will move me away from people. Interesting, in the story of Joseph and Mary, Joseph's pledge to be married, the text says, which was, we sometimes use the word betrothed. It's not a common word anymore. But what that meant was, it was kind of like a promise ring. You weren't really engaged, but you were promised. And so it was like you were actually already married, but without all the benefits of marriage. And so Joseph, when Mary comes to him and says, hey, I'm pregnant by the Lord, hello. He's this righteous man, the text says. He was faithful to the law, the text says. And so he quietly decides that he's not going to bring Mary to shame, and he quietly decides he's going to move away from Mary. We would call it, he quiet quits on Mary, is what he does today. But what's really going on? Is that the whole thing? Is that the whole story? What's going on? What's under the hood for him? I want you to see how Matthew writes this in Matthew chapter 1, verse 20. After Joseph had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be, what is the word? Afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. So in other words, all this outer stuff can be going on, even religious sounding stuff, but the reason it's happening is because of fear. And Joseph was afraid, and so he moves away from Mary. And one of the main reasons we move away from people is because of fear, isn't it? It's fear of how we'll look. It's fear of how we'll feel. It's fear of what they'll say to us or what they'll do to us. Fear of how we'll respond. We're not sure how we'll respond in the moment, and so we're afraid. Let me show you the power of fear. Here's one of the descriptions the angel says to Joseph about Jesus. He says, all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. It's beautiful, beautiful Christmas text, isn't it? And we are like, yeah, God's with us. Jesus is with us. And we nod our heads along, and we go, yeah, God, we accept that God is with us, but here's what the power of fear. We reject having people with us, because fear has the power to move us away from the people in our life. Here's what fear will do. Fear will make us pause and question whether or not the relationship can work out. Have you felt this? Here's the second barrier in our inner map of the world, is lack of time and space can move me away from people. Again, if you want to read the Christmas story, you go to Matthew chapter 1 and 2. You go to Luke chapter 1 and 2. They give the narrative story of Christmas, and you can go to John chapter 1, which is the theological version of the Christmas story. You can read the narrative there. But Luke's maybe most famous line, I said it to you just a bit earlier, is translated from the King James, but there was no room for them in the end. You're familiar with this? You've heard this phrase, right? Here's what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that Mary and Joseph went back to Nazareth and there was a convention in town, and so all the rooms were full. Doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that the Hilton app wasn't working. You're like, Mary, can you get it to download? I can't get it to download on my, what's happening right here? What it means is no one had space. This is Nazareth, a very small place. No one had space in their house. I've got a picture here of a first century home of what it was kind of like. At night, what you would do is you would bring in your animals, and they would stay downstairs. You might have an upper level, but then you can kind of see that the family would sleep upstairs, at least in this model right here. And so when you had a census, which is what was happening, all these people came back to their hometown. And so you had the animals and Aunt Sally in the house, and there was just no space. And so they went to their relatives and said, do you have space? And they said no. In fact, the NIV captures it in verse 7 of Luke chapter 2. She wrapped him in cloths, placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available to them. That's really what it means. That's really practical, isn't it? Sometimes we move away from people because we simply don't have the time or the space. You're like, my schedule's too busy. I just can't get together. If you have little kids, you know what this is like. You have no margin. You're exhausted all the time. Anybody? Like, is this child ever going to sleep? Is this child ever going to do what we say? What's going to happen with this child? If you're a single mom, you have very little, or a single parent, you have very little margin because you're trying to juggle so many things. No guilt in any of those things. During those seasons of your kid's life, your job is to actually move close to your kids. That's who you need to make room for, is your kids in your life. But I want you to read this text the way that the church fathers read the early text. They would sometimes read it what's called allegorically. They would read it for multiple layers of meaning, but allegorically means that you would layer some meaning onto what was happening. And so, yes, they're talking about the physical space that's not there, but you could also take it a layer deeper and talk about the inner space. Like there's the outer space around me. I don't have time. My schedule's too busy. There's not room for you in my life. But then there's another level, isn't there? There's this inner space where I do or I don't want to welcome someone into my world. Are you feeling what I'm saying? I have a mentor who talks about it like this. He says that people are like Legos. And some people are, the big green sheet of Legos. Anybody? You got lots of room for people. Do you see the image? Like you can fit a lot of other Legos on top of this big sheet of Legos. Some people, you're an extrovert. You love people. You can't get enough of people. You might be not quite as, you might be irregularly shaped. And you got room for people, but there's limits to what you can do. And then some people are a version of, smaller. Maybe you just have a handful of space for other people. And then there's some of you that you're like, listen. There's me and one other person, and I'm not sure about the other person, right? I'm not. It's not looking good right now. Some of that is personality, but here's what I'm trying to say. Sometimes, because of life, what happens is we shrink our willingness to let other people in. Anybody recognize that? If you were to dig around the metaphorical living room of your heart, behind the couch would be hiding some pain. There's some old stuff there. And because of that, you don't want to make space. And so this lack of inner space makes us push people away. And we don't want to make room. There's too much pain. No thanks. Third one is that ego moves me away from people. Ego moves me away from people. When the Magi visited Jesus and then they went back, King Herod heard about the visit, and when he said, hey, tell me, I want to hear about this. And in Matthew chapter 2, verse 3, when King Herod heard of this, he was disturbed. It's our word from last week. It's translated trouble in other texts. And all of Jerusalem was troubled with him. He was disturbed. It's his inner turmoil. Here's what was going on for Herod is not just, he just felt bad, but it was a threat. And then the threat came from his ego. You can visit a couple different places that Herod built when he was the king at this time. You can visit a place called Masada. I've been there, hiked it up. And there's a picture here. If you can, not now, but you can Google an artist's rendering of this fortress literally on top of this rock. The way you had to get to it then was the way you can go now. There is a cable car up to the top now. But they had to hike this trail. They called it the Snake Trail. And so a massive fortress was built on top of this plateau, and it is there today as a monument to Herod's ego. He built another one called Herodium. You can visit it today as well. All giant monuments to all the historians who study this said Herod had an incredible ego. And you know what ego does is ego edges people out. Let me give you a contemporary example of ego. I was listening to a podcast. It's called The Diary of a CEO. And this is one of the most popular podcasts in the world. About 17 million or so people listen to this podcast regularly. And the gentleman who runs this podcast will interview some of the smartest people in the world from all different stratas of society and industries. And lately he's been inviting people on to talk about the rise of AI, artificial intelligence. I don't know if you're tracking this at all. We're getting ready to come into a world we're not quite sure what's going to happen with artificial intelligence. But he was interviewing this person who's deeply embedded in the tech world, and is very concerned about what's going to happen with AI. And so he's asking him, hey, when you talk to the CEOs of these companies who are saying we should have artificial intelligence and all these things should happen, what do they say when they're behind closed doors? Like, I know what they say out publicly, we're going to cure cancer and everyone's going to have an income and it's all going to be good. He said, but when you get with them behind closed doors, because you're in those rooms, what do they say? And I'm going to read you what he says. It's kind of alarming, but I want to point out ego to you. Listen to what he says. He says, in the end, a lot of the tech people I talk to, and I really grill them on AI, about why are you doing this? Why are you pursuing artificial intelligence? They retreat into, number one, determinism. It's just going to happen. Number two, the inevitable replacement of biological life with digital life. And number three, that being a good thing. Anyways, at its core, it's an emotional desire to meet and speak to the most intelligent entity that they've ever met. And they have some ego-religious intuition that they'll somehow be a part of the handful of people in the world making these decisions for all of humanity, by the way. It's thrilling to start an exciting fire. They feel they'll die either way, so they prefer to light it and see what happens. Ego. Ego, literally at a massive societal level, ego is saying we're not going to need people, we're going to need technology. Ego is when you're driven by unacknowledged or selfish needs. And here's what happens when you have ego. You have a self-imposed blindness. And nobody can get close to somebody with ego. It just doesn't if you're like not close to anybody in your life and they're telling you and you're not picking it up, I just want to suggest it's ego. And what ego does is it makes us pretend. So I just question for you, have you mapped the terrain of your inner world? I don't know where you get your theology. I've got some of my theology from Saturday morning cartoons when I was a kid. And G.I. Joe used to say, and this is tapping into a deeper stream, but stay with me. He used to say, knowing is half the battle. You got to know. What's going on in my inner world? Because if I don't know, I can't move close to people.